cat suddenly breaks into hospital. Nurse started crying when she realizes why. The fluorescent lights of St. Mary's Hospital cast an eerie glow across the polished floors as the night shift settled into its usual rhythm. Elena Martinez tucked a strand of dark hair behind her ear as she updated patient charts at the nurse's station, the quiet beeping of monitors providing a familiar backdrop to her thoughts. After 7 years of working the graveyard shift, she had grown accustomed to the hospital's nocturnal personality, the way shadows stretched longer, how whispers seemed to echo just a bit more, and how every unexpected sound demanded attention. Tonight felt different, though. There was a heaviness in the air that she couldn't quite explain, like the atmosphere before a storm. As she reached for her coffee cup, a commotion erupted from the direction of the emergency entrance. The sound of startled voices and rushing footsteps broke through the midnight calm. "Who let that cat in?" someone shouted, followed by the distinct clatter of a medical tray hitting the floor. Elena's head snapped up just in time to see a streak of gray dart past the nurse's station. Her coffee cup slipped from her fingers, shattering against the floor, but she barely noticed. Time seemed to slow as the cat turned its head mid-run, and their eyes met. "Whispers?" The name escaped her lips in a breathless whisper, her heart thundering against her ribs. It was impossible. Whispers had disappeared 8 years ago, on the same night her mother's diary had vanished. Yet there was no mistaking those distinctive markings: gray fur with a perfect white diamond on the chest, and most notably, those piercing green eyes that seemed to hold secrets of their own. Her mother's cat had been unique, and this one was identical, right down to the slight kink in its tail. "Someone catch that thing!" Dr. Thompson called out as he emerged from a patient's room, but the cat moved with otherworldly grace, evading every attempt to corner it. Elena's legs moved before her mind could process what she was doing. She kicked off her uncomfortable nursing shoes, knowing she needed to be quick and quiet. As she rounded the corner in her sock-covered feet, she caught glimpses of gray fur disappearing around corners, leading her deeper into the hospital's maze-like corridors. The chase took her past the pediatric ward, where night lights cast star-shaped patterns on the walls, past the eerily quiet surgical wing, and toward areas of the hospital she rarely visited during her regular shifts. With each turn, memories flooded back, memories she had carefully locked away in the deepest corners of her mind. "Mom, why do you always write in that diary?" Elena had asked one night, watching her mother scribble frantically in the leather-bound book, whispers curled up in her lap. "Sometimes, mi amor, the truth is too heavy to carry alone," her mother had replied, running her fingers through Whisper's fur. "This diary, it keeps my secrets safe until the right time comes to share them." The cat paused at an intersection, turning to look at Elena with an intensity that sent chills down her spine. For a moment, she could have sworn she saw her mother's determination reflected in those feline eyes. Then it darted left, toward the emergency ward. Elena's breath caught in her throat as she followed, her feet carrying her past the double doors marked "Emergency Department." The familiar controlled chaos of the ER surrounded her, monitors beeping, staff calling out vital signs, the squeak of gurney wheels against linoleum. But something was different tonight. The air felt charged with possibility, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Through the gaps between rushing medical staff and equipment, Elena spotted the cat again. It had somehow made its way into one of the trauma rooms where a team of doctors worked frantically around a patient. The cat leaped onto the bed with impossible agility, careful not to disturb any of the medical equipment, and curled up beside the unconscious man's shoulder. "Get that animal out of here!" Dr. Thompson ordered, but as one of the nurses reached for the cat, the monitors suddenly screamed with warning beeps. The patient's vitals were dropping. "Blood pressure's crashing!" someone called out. Elena pushed her way closer, her nursing instincts kicking in despite her fixation on the cat. As she reached the bedside, ready to assist, her eyes fell on the patient's face. Though it was partially obscured by an oxygen mask and years of aging, something about his features struck her as hauntingly familiar. The cat turned its gaze to Elena once more, and in that moment, she felt the weight of understanding settle over her. This wasn't just any stray that had wandered into the hospital. This was Whispers, or something wearing Whisper's form, and it had come here with a purpose. As her eyes darted between the mysterious patient and the cat that had once been her mother's closest confidant, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that her life was about to change forever. She just didn't know if she was ready for what that change might reveal. Elena's hands trembled as she helped stabilize the mysterious patient, her mind racing with possibilities she dared not voice. The cat, whether it was truly Whispers or some cruel coincidence, remained perfectly still on the bed, its presence both comforting and unnerving the medical team working to save the man's life. BP stabilizing, Dr. Thompson announced, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. Let's get a complete workup. No ID on this one. Jane Doe brought him in after finding him collapsed outside that old bookstore on Mason Street. Elena's breath caught. The old bookstore. Another piece of her past that refused to stay buried. 8 years ago, that same bookstore had been her mother's favorite retreat, a place where she'd spend hours searching through dusty volumes of medical texts, claiming she was researching. Now Elena wondered if there had been more to those visits than she'd known. Martinez, start processing him, Dr. Thompson ordered, pulling off his gloves. And for heaven's sake, someone remove that cat before infection control has a meltdown. But when Elena reached for the cat, it didn't resist. Instead, it stood gracefully and leaped to the floor, padding toward a small personal effects bag that had been hastily placed in the corner. With deliberate movements, it pawed at the bag until something fell out, a worn leather wallet. Elena picked up the wallet with latex-gloved hands, her professional demeanor masking the storm of emotions beneath. As she opened it, a small photograph fluttered to the floor, landing face down. The ID in the wallet read, James Turner. But something about it felt off. The lamination was too perfect, the edges too clean for a card that looked weathered. She reached for the fallen photograph, and her world tilted on its axis. The image showed a much younger version of the unconscious man standing beside a teenage boy in a baseball uniform. The teenager's face was one she saw in her family photos, one she had memorized from years of desperate searching. Her brother Daniel at 15, the age he had been when he disappeared. I need a minute, Elena managed to say, her voice surprisingly steady despite the chaos in her mind. She slipped the photograph into her pocket, knowing she should log it as evidence but unable to let it go. The cat watched her with those knowing green eyes, as if approving her decision. In the relative privacy of the supply closet, Elena leaned against the shelves, her hands pressed against her temples. The photograph couldn't be a coincidence. But if this man knew Daniel, why was he carrying a fake ID? And why had he collapsed outside the very bookstore her mother had frequented? A soft meow drew her attention. The cat had followed her, sitting in the doorway like a silent guardian. As Elena watched, it moved to a specific shelf and batted at a box of surgical gloves until it fell. Behind where the box had been, pressed against the wall, was a yellowed envelope. With shaking fingers, Elena retrieved it. The paper was old, but the handwriting on the front was unmistakable, her mother's elegant script spelling out, "For Elena, when the time comes." The date written in the corner was just 3 days before her mother's unexpected death. Before she could open it, her pager buzzed urgently. The mysterious patient was coding. Elena shoved the envelope into her scrubs pocket alongside the photograph and raced back to the trauma room. The next few minutes were a blur of CPR, medications, and the controlled frenzy of a medical team fighting to save a life. Through it all, she couldn't help but notice that the cat had returned to its position by the patient's head, this time letting out a low, mournful sound that seemed to resonate with something deep in Elena's soul. Got him back, Dr. Thompson announced after what felt like hours but had likely been only minutes. Let's get him to ICU. Martinez, you're with him. Monitor him closely. I don't like how unstable he is. As they wheeled the patient toward the elevator, Elena felt the weight of the envelope and photograph in her pocket. The cat followed them, somehow slipping into the elevator unseen by anyone else. In the confined space, Elena could smell a familiar scent, her mother's favorite lavender hand cream. But that was impossible. She looked down at the cat, which met her gaze with an almost human expression of concern. The ICU was quieter, the beeping of monitors more subdued. As Elena settled in to watch over her mysterious patient, she pulled out the envelope with trembling hands. The cat jumped onto the windowsill, the city lights behind it creating an otherworldly glow around its silhouette. Just as she was about to break the seal, the patient's hand twitched, and a hoarse whisper escaped his lips, words that made Elena shocked. "Maria! I'm sorry. I tried to protect him." Maria, her mother's name. The monitors began to wail once more, and Elena's world spiraled into chaos, the unopened envelope still burning in her pocket. Once the patient was stabilized again, Elena retreated to the ICU nursing station, her hands still shaking as she pulled out the envelope. The cat perched on the counter beside her, its tail curled around a framed photo of the hospital's founding members. Among them stood a younger version of her mother, proud in her head nurse uniform, her smile hiding secrets Elena was only now beginning to uncover. The envelope contained 2 items, a key with a faded brass finish and a handwritten letter. Elena unfolded the paper, her mother's familiar scent of lavender growing stronger as she smoothed out the creases. "My dearest Elena, if you're reading this, then Whispers has found you. There's so much I should have told you about Daniel's disappearance, about the work I was doing, about why your brother had to run. But I was afraid that knowing the truth would put you in danger too. The key opens safety deposit box number 247 at First National Bank. What you'll find there will explain everything. But Elena, mi amor, be careful. The people who forced Daniel to disappear are still out there, and they're closer than you think. Trust Whispers. Like all mothers' loves, some things transcend even death. Can't do mi amor, mama?" Elena's vision blurred with tears as a memory she'd long suppressed crashed over her like a tidal wave. The night Daniel disappeared hadn't been as sudden as everyone believed. She remembered now, a conversation she'd overheard 2 days before, her mother and brother arguing in hushed voices in the kitchen. "They'll finish her if I stay," Daniel had said, his voice cracking. "They already know about the evidence. Then we'll go to the police," their mother had insisted. "The police? Mom, they are the police. At least some of them." The rest of the conversation had been lost as they moved deeper into the house, but Elena remembered the fear in their voices, the way Daniel's hands had trembled as he'd hugged her goodbye the next morning, the last time she'd seen him. A soft brush against her arm brought her back to the present. The cat, Whispers, was pawing at her phone, and Elena noticed 3 missed calls from the hospital lab. The DNA test she'd ordered on the mysterious patient had come back with unexpected complications. Dr. Chen, the lab director, was waiting for her when she arrived at the basement lab. His usually calm demeanor seemed shaken. "Nurse Martinez, I ran the test twice to be sure. The patient's DNA shows a strong familial match to someone in our employee database." Elena's heart thundered in her chest. "Who?" "Your mother, Maria Martinez. The pattern suggests." He paused, studying her face carefully. "The patient is likely her son." The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Elena gripped the edge of the lab counter. "That's impossible. My brother would be 33 now. This man is at least 50. Dr. Chen shifted uncomfortably. "That's the other anomaly. We found traces of a compound in his blood that's typically associated with rapid aging. It's experimental, something I've only seen in theoretical research papers." "Elena, was your mother involved in any clinical trials before she died?" The pieces started falling into place. Her mother's endless hours at the bookstore researching, the missing diary, Daniel's cryptic warning about evidence. What had her mother uncovered? A commotion from upstairs interrupted her thoughts. Her pager lit up with an urgent message. The patient was awake and becoming combative. As Elena raced back to the ICU, Whispers somehow keeping pace beside her, another memory surfaced, one that had been buried so deep she'd convinced herself it was a dream. The night before Daniel vanished, she'd woken to find Whispers sitting on her windowsill, watching her mother bury something in their backyard at midnight. The next day, both the cat and the diary had disappeared, and her mother had never mentioned either again. Elena burst into the ICU room to find the patient trying to pull out his 4 lines, his eyes wild with panic. "They're coming," he rasped, grabbing her arm with surprising strength. "Maria's research, the trials, they're still doing it. Making people disappear by making them unrecognizable to their own families." "Who's doing it?" Elena demanded, her professional calm warring with her personal turmoil. The man's eyes focused on her face, recognition dawning in them. "Elena? Little Elena?" His voice cracked. You look just like her." His gaze drifted to Whispers, who had jumped onto the bed. "Maria's cat, then it worked. She found a way." Before he could finish, the hospital's security alarm began blaring. Through the ICU window, Elena saw 3 men in police uniforms moving through the ward with purposeful steps. But something about their movements seemed off, mechanical, their faces too smooth and ageless. The patient's heart monitor began beeping erratically again. "The key," he gasped. "Get to the bank before they do. Your mother, she found the cure. In the diary, she found." His voice trailed off as his eyes rolled back. "Code Blue!" Elena shouted, reaching for the crash cart. But Whispers suddenly hissed, a sound she'd never heard from the gentle cat before, and leaped between her and the patient, its fur standing on end as it faced the door. The men in uniforms were getting closer, and Elena had seconds to make a decision that would change everything. The truth about her brother, her mother's research, and the forces that had torn her family apart lay somewhere between a safety deposit box and the mysteries of the past. But first, she had to choose, stay with her dying patient, or run. In the split second before Elena made her decision, Whispers did something extraordinary. The cat leaped onto the medical cart, knocking over a tray of supplies. The resulting crash drew the attention of nearby staff, who came running, creating enough chaos to block the approaching officer's path. "Get his charts," the patient whispered urgently. "Current medications. They'll make it look like natural causes." Understanding flashed through Elena's mind. She grabbed the patient's medical chart and records, stuffing them into her scrubs along with her mother's letter. As the crash team rushed in, she slipped out through the service corridor, her heart pounding against her ribs. The morning sun was just beginning to paint the sky in shades of pink as Elena's car sped toward First National Bank. She'd called in a personal emergency, buying herself a few precious hours. Whispers sat in the passenger seat, eerily calm despite their hasty escape. The bank wouldn't open for another hour, giving Elena time to examine the medical records she'd taken. What she found shocked her. Hidden among routine medications were traces of compounds she'd never seen before, experimental medicines with codes instead of names. But one term kept repeating: Project Kronos. A quick search on her phone revealed nothing about Project Kronos, but she did find something else. A news article from 8 years ago about a whistleblower in a pharmaceutical company who disappeared before testifying about human trials. The name had never been released, but the company involved was Tempus Pharmaceuticals, a major hospital supplier. Elena's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Your mother's diary holds the key to reversing everything. They know you have the safety deposit box key. Be careful. J." The bank's parking lot was empty except for one car, Dr. Thompson's familiar blue sedan. Elena's instincts screamed danger, but she had no choice. The answers she needed were inside that safety deposit box. She entered through the side door, Whispers somehow slipping in behind her despite the bank's no animals policy. The elderly security guard merely nodded, his eyes sliding past the cat as if it were invisible. Elena approached the counter where a young teller was setting up for the day. "I need to access box 247, Elena said, producing both her ID and the key. "It's urgent." The teller's fingers flew over her keyboard. "I'm sorry, that box was accessed yesterday. It's empty now." Elena's heart sank, but Whispers suddenly darted toward the vault area, meowing insistently. The cat's behavior drew the attention of an older woman emerging from the back office. "Margaret?" Elena gasped, recognizing her mother's former colleague from the hospital. "What are you doing here?" The older woman's eyes widened in recognition, then darted to Whispers. Something passed across her face, understanding, perhaps even relief. "Your mother knew this day would come," Margaret said quietly. "Follow me." In her office, Margaret unlocked a personal safe. "Maria gave me specific instructions. If anyone ever came asking about box 247, I was to empty it immediately and wait." She said her cat, Margaret's voice faltered as she looked at Whispers, "would lead the right person to me." She handed Elena a thick manila envelope. "Your mother discovered something terrible happening at the hospital, Elena. Unauthorized experiments, funded by Tempus Pharmaceuticals. They were testing age acceleration on vulnerable patients, trying to develop some sort of rapid aging weapon. Your brother found out and tried to expose them." Elena's hands trembled as she opened the envelope. Inside was her mother's missing diary, along with USB drives, photographs, and detailed chemical formulas. "But why take Daniel? Why not just silence him?" "Because they needed test subjects with specific genetic markers. Daniel was perfect for their trials." Margaret's voice broke. "Your mother spent years developing a counteragent, something to reverse the effects. She succeeded, but before she could release the cure, they found out. The night she died." "It wasn't a heart attack, was it?" Margaret shook her head sadly. "She hid her research where they never think to look, in plain sight. The formulas in her diary are written in a special code, one that only a mother and daughter would understand. References to your childhood, your family recipes, memories only you would recognize." A commotion from the bank's lobby interrupted them. Male voices, authoritative and familiar, asking about box 247. The same voices Elena had heard in the hospital. Margaret pressed a key into Elena's hand. "My cabin in the mountains. Take what you need from my safe there. Your mother's final batch of the counteragent. She kept it hidden, waiting for the right moment." Whispers suddenly grew alert, fur bristling. Through the office window, Elena saw Dr. Thompson talking to the men in uniforms, pointing toward Margaret's office. "There's a back exit through the file room," Margaret whispered urgently. "Elena, listen carefully. The age acceleration isn't complete in your brother's case. That's why he still has lucid moments, why he could recognize you. But you only have 48 hours before the changes become permanent. After that." The office door handle began to turn. Elena clutched the envelope to her chest, her mother's diary pressing against her heart like a shield. The truth had finally come to light, but now she faced an even greater challenge, saving her brother before time ran out completely. Whispers darted toward a tall filing cabinet, revealing a hidden door behind it. As Elena slipped through the exit, she heard Margaret's voice confronting the entering men, buying her precious seconds to escape. The race against time had begun, and somewhere in her mother's coded memories lay the key to reversing the impossible. Margaret's cabin sat nestled among towering pines, the late morning sun casting dappled shadows across its weathered porch. Elena's hands shook as she unlocked the door, Whispers darting inside ahead of her. The cat seemed to know exactly where to go, leading her straight to a painting of a seaside landscape hanging in the study. Behind the painting, Elena found Margaret's safe. Using the key she'd been given, she opened it to discover a small cooling unit inside. The unit contained several vials of an iridescent blue liquid, each labeled with her mother's distinctive handwriting. Project Kronos Reversal Serum MM. But it was what lay beside the vials that made Elena's breath catch. A USB drive marked security footage, and a stack of old Polaroid photos. The photos showed a younger version of Dr. Thompson standing alongside a man Elena recognized from hospital board meetings, CEO Richard Tempus himself. They were smiling, standing over what appeared to be operating tables with blurred figures strapped to them. Elena's phone buzzed, a text from a nurse friend. "They're moving your patient to Tempus Private Research Center in 30 minutes. Something about specialized care. Dr. T's orders." Time was running out. Elena spread her mother's diary on Margaret's desk, her mind racing to decode its secrets. The pages appeared to be filled with innocent memories and recipes, but Elena now understood they held something far more vital. "Remember the sugar cookies we made for your science fair, mi amor?" One entry read. "3 cups of love, 2 teaspoons of hope, and just a pinch of starlight. Elena's eyes widened. The science fair, she'd won first place for a project about chemical reactions. And the recipe measurements, they weren't measurements at all, but molecular ratios for the counteragent. Like the time we painted your room. Another entry read. Blue like the summer sky, green like Papa's garden herbs, mixed just so. The stabilizing compound, Elena whispered, remembering how she and her mother had actually mixed paint colors that day, carefully measuring each drop. Her mother had turned their everyday memories into a complex chemical cipher. Whispers suddenly jumped onto the desk, pawing at a specific page. The entry was about Daniel's 16th birthday, describing how they'd had to remake his cake 3 times to get it right. Elena read it carefully, her medical training allowing her to see the hidden message, the precise temperature and timing needed for the counteragent to work. A loud crack echoed through the trees outside. Whisper's ears perked up, and Elena quickly photographed the crucial diary pages with her phone. Through the window, she spotted movement among the trees, men in dark suits approaching the cabin. Elena grabbed the vials and the USB drive, shoving them into her bag. But as she turned to leave, Whispers blocked her path, insisting she look at one final diary entry. It was the last one her mother had written, dated the day before she died. My dearest Elena, if you're reading this, you've discovered the truth about Project Kronos. But there's something else you need to know. The age acceleration process has a fatal flaw. It can only be reversed by someone sharing the subject's bloodline. The counteragent must be administered by a blood relative, or the reversal will fail. That's why they took Daniel instead of finishing him. They needed him alive to perfect the process, to eliminate this weakness. What they didn't know was that this flaw was actually the key to stopping them. The bond between family members isn't a weakness, it's the strongest force in nature. The hospital's basement, in the old records room where I used to work, there's a hidden lab behind the wall of filing cabinets. That's where it all started, and that's where it needs to end. You'll know what to do, mi amor. You always were the clever one. And Elena? I'm sorry I kept so many secrets. Everything I did was to protect you both. Remember what I always told you about Starlight? Elena's throat tightened. Even in the darkest night, she whispered, it shows us the way home. The sound of footsteps on the porch spurred her into action. She ran to the cabin's back door, Whispers leading her to a trail that wound behind the property. As she fled through the woods, Elena's mind raced with this new information. The hospital basement, of course. The perfect hiding place would be somewhere they'd already searched. Her phone buzzed again. Patient transfer delayed. System-wide computer failure at hospital. All electronic records temporarily down. Elena smiled grimly. Margaret must have initiated some sort of failsafe, buying her precious time. But she knew it wouldn't last long. The race to save Daniel had become even more complicated. Not only did she need to reach him before the 48-hour window closed, but she was the only one who could administer the cure. As she reached her car, hidden on a service road behind the cabin, Elena realized something else. Her mother hadn't just left her the formula for the counteragent. She'd left her a weapon, proof of Tempus Pharmaceuticals' experiments, evidence that could bring down their entire operation. But first, she had to get back into the hospital, past the men who were undoubtedly watching every entrance, and find a secret lab that had stayed hidden for years. And she had to do it all before they moved Daniel to a facility where she'd never reach him. Whispers settled into the passenger seat, those knowing green eyes fixed on Elena with unwavering confidence. In that moment, she felt her mother's presence stronger than ever, guiding her toward the final confrontation that would either save her brother or condemn him to a fate worse than death. Elena started the car, her mother's last message burning in her mind. The clever one. Yes, she'd always been clever. And now, she had an idea, one that would either save everything or cost her everything. Elena's plan came together as she drove back to the hospital. She called in every favor she'd earned over 7 years of night shifts, setting her pieces in motion. By the time she pulled into the staff parking lot, wearing surgical scrubs borrowed from Margaret's cabin, The evening shift change was in full swing, the perfect cover for slipping inside unnoticed. Whispers vanished the moment they entered the building, but Elena trusted the cat would appear when needed. She made her way to the basement using the service elevator, her mother's counteragent secured in a borrowed insulin kit that wouldn't raise suspicion. The hospital's computer system was coming back online, which meant her window of opportunity was shrinking. The old records room looked exactly as she remembered from her childhood visits, rows of metal filing cabinets stretching into shadows. But now she saw it through new eyes, noting the subtle signs her mother had left. The slight wear pattern on the floor leading to one particular cabinet. The almost invisible arrow scratched into the baseboard, pointing to a hidden latch. The secret lab emerged from behind the sliding wall of cabinets, like a ghost from the past. Dust covered the abandoned equipment, but the power still worked. Her mother had wired it into the hospital's emergency circuit. As the lights flickered on, Elena gasped. The wall was covered with photos of test subjects, dozens of faces showing progressive aging. In the center was Daniel's photo, marked Primary Subject Alpha. She'd barely finished documenting everything with her phone when she heard footsteps above. The patient transfer would be starting soon. Elena rushed to the hospital's pneumatic tube system, used for sending samples between floors. She pulled out 4 identical insulin kits, each containing a vial of blue liquid, and sent them to different floors. Let them chase wild geese. Her phone vibrated, a message from her nurse friend. Transfer team heading to ICU now. 4 guards with them. Elena took a different route up, using an old maintenance ladder her mother had marked in the diary. She emerged in the ICU storage room just as she heard Dr. Thompson's voice in the hallway. Prepare him for transfer. And check everyone's ID. No one gets near him without clearance. Elena glanced at her watch. 41 hours had passed since Daniel's admission. Time was running out. She pulled out her phone and pressed send on a pre-written email, copying every major news outlet and law enforcement agency. The subject line read, Project Kronos exposed human trials and corporate cover-up at Tempus Pharmaceuticals. The attached files included her mother's evidence, the photos from Margaret's cabin, and the documentation she'd just gathered. A distraction was coming, she just had to wait for it. She didn't wait long. Alarms began blaring throughout the hospital, not medical alerts, but security breaches. Elena's message had reached its targets. Through the storage room window, she saw security personnel running toward the hospital entrance. Police sirens wailed in the distance. In the chaos that followed, Elena saw her chance. She slipped into Daniel's room, finding him conscious but groggy. The guards had left to investigate the commotion, and Dr. Thompson was nowhere in sight. Daniel, she whispered, approaching the bed. It's Elena. I'm here to take you home. His aged face turned toward her, recognition flickering in his eyes. Little sister, he rasped. You look just like Mom. Whispers appeared on the windowsill, keeping watch as Elena prepared the counteragent. Her hands shook as she loaded the syringe, remembering her mother's words about blood relatives and natural bonds. This might hurt, she warned, finding a vein in his arm. But I promise it's going to make things right. As she administered the blue liquid, Whispers suddenly tensed. Dr. Thompson burst into the room, his face contorted with rage. Stop! You don't know what you're doing! But it was too late. The counteragent was already flowing into Daniel's veins. Elena stepped between her brother and Thompson, holding up her phone. It's over. Everyone knows everything. Look outside. Thompson ran to the window. Police cars surrounded the hospital. News vans were pulling up. And there, being led out in handcuffs, was Richard Tempus himself. You've ruined everything, Thompson snarled, reaching for Elena. A gray blur shot across the room as Whispers launched at Thompson's face, claws extended. The doctor stumbled backward, crashing into a cart of medical supplies. By the time he regained his footing, hospital security had arrived, real security this time, accompanied by special agents who'd been investigating Tempus Pharmaceuticals for months. Elena turned back to Daniel, watching in amazement as the counteragent took effect. The wrinkles began to fade. His gray hair darkened. Slowly, the brother she remembered began to emerge from beneath the artificial aging. The archives, Daniel mumbled as the changes progressed. Mom's real diary, hidden in the wall. Elena smiled, squeezing his hand. I found it. I found everything. You're safe now. Both of us are. Hours later, as the sun rose on a new day, Elena sat beside Daniel's bed, watching him sleep. He looked exactly as he should at 33, as if the lost years had never happened. The FBI had spent the night gathering evidence from the hidden lab, and Margaret was working with prosecutors to bring everyone involved to justice. Whispers lay curled up between them, purring contentedly. Elena stroked the cat's soft fur, remembering her mother's words about love transcending death. Perhaps some bonds really were stronger than any force in nature. Daniel stirred, opening his eyes, clear and young again. I had the strangest dream, he said. Mom was there, and she kept saying she was proud of both of us. Elena felt tears slip down her cheeks as she smiled. It wasn't a dream, she said softly, watching Whispers lift its head to gaze at them with those familiar, knowing green eyes. She's been with us all along. Outside the window, the morning sunlight painted the sky in shades of hope, its warmth touching three figures in the hospital room: a brother found, a sister's unwavering love, and a mother's eternal presence in the form of a remarkable cat. Their family was whole again, their story had come full circle, and somewhere, Elena knew, her mother was smiling. As if reading her thoughts, Whispers stood, stretching gracefully before settling back down between the siblings. The cat's purring grew louder, a soothing lullaby that seemed to say what they all knew: they were finally, truly,